Welcome to the Teach-In Network's teach-in on how to protest. My name is Ryan Black, and I'm the organizing director at RootsAction. We are live and recording, and we'll have this video posted to share tomorrow on the RootsAction YouTube and social media pages. Thank you to everyone who is joining us now, and to our speakers, who I will introduce shortly, and throughout the night you'll get to know them. Our theme for tonight's teach-in is how to protest. And if you're here, you probably understand that the right to protest in the US is under threat. It was announced today that Trump is planning to cancel student visas for pro-Palestinian protesters. And this comes after police and school administrations cracked down on encampments and protests at universities across the country over the last year. So right now, as much as any other time in history, we need people to be prepared and educated about exercising their right to protest. And you can help us do that. This teach-in isn't the end-all for teach-ins on protesting. We want you to organize your own teach-in and bring this knowledge and knowledge from other experts to the groups you are connected to online and in your community. To do that, the Teach-In Network will connect you and your local group or campus group with expert speakers for your own event. We won't force you to say or do anything. We just want to connect you with amazing speakers like the ones we have here tonight, with organizations, local activists, campus groups, and anyone who is interested in educating their communities about protesting, foreign policy, Gaza, nuclear weapons, and much more as we roll out more toolboxes on teachinnetwork.org. So if you're not sure where to start, I will show you. So this is teachinnetwork.org. You see our toolboxes right here at the start. Gaza, how to protest, which is what we're focusing on tonight. We have one on Ukraine, NATO, and the new Cold War coming out soon, as well as nuclear weapons. If you're not sure where to start, you can go to our How to Organize a Teach-In with the Teach-In Network page. And this will go through the basics of planning it, promoting it, organizing it, and like setting a schedule and those kinds of things, hosting it, engaging with people, and at the end, what do you do after the teach-in with your list of people and you've just engaged and energized all these people? What's next? But, you know, a list of things to do isn't always going to get you to the finish line. So if you're not sure where to start at all, you can go to our Not Sure Where to Start page and fill out a quick form, and we will get back to you. This is you just saying, hey, I'm interested in organizing a teach-in, but I'm not sure how to get started, how to get people there. I'm not sure about the technology, anything like that. All we need is you to be interested, and you can connect with us, and we'll walk you through it. If you already know what you're doing, you can head on over to our speakers page and look at this huge list, couple dozen speakers on here from all sorts of progressive interest issues, and we have them all labeled here. If you go to the specific toolboxes, you can find primers, presentations, videos, social media accounts that we find informative, articles, and then you can find the speakers for those specific toolboxes right there. So, am I still sharing? Did I stop sharing? Oh, no, here we go. Okay, so with that, let's get started. Tonight we will be joined by Linda Sarsour, Jeffrey Sterling, Rachel Small, Sean Malloy, and Christine Hong, as well as we'll hear some words from RootsAction organizers Eric Ross and Richie Sergenko. So to start, our first speaker, Linda Sarsour, she'll be speaking on the state of protest and how to show up and responsibly as organizers and activists. She is an organizer, strategist, author, and co-founder of Until Freedom, the Women's March in MPower Change. Linda, thank you for being here. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you to RootsAction, to the Teach-In Network for inviting me here today. I'm fired up, my friends. I just want you to know that. I want everyone to know that I was around in the Trump 1.0, and I'm here again, and I survived. I'm back at Trump 2.0. And there's many reasons that we can discuss, and maybe there's a teach-in at some point to analyze how we got here. But that's not why we're here. We're here because our communities are under attack. We have been watching the past week probably somewhere around 40 executive orders, many of them targeting the most marginalized people in our communities. And one of the most important things to watch from this administration is their crackdown on protesters and threatening protesters and making people and providing all this information, inundation of information, overstimulation of information, and really creating a lot of fear in our communities. And so what I want to share today around protesting, and as you all know, that's literally like what I do. I've been a protester for the last 25 years. And no protesting is without strategy. No protest is without purpose. And I think that's the most important thing that we're going to have to focus on in the next 4 years and beyond. Personally, I don't just protest based on election cycles. I don't protest based on presidential administrations. And that is the number one thing and lesson that we should hold together. Many of you know I was one of the co-founders of the Women's March on Washington back in the end of 2016, and you saw the mass mobilization that we put together. All of us, we were all there together in January of 2017. And if you remember, during the 4 years of Donald Trump, we were organizing every day. There were people outside, from the climate movement, from movements around racial justice and police accountability, immigration and immigrant rights, you name it. We were outside, and we were opposing, Supreme Court nominations. The scale of nonviolent civil disobedience was, again, consistent across the board. And then all of a sudden we have an election. All of a sudden Donald Trump is no longer the president. And then half the people that were supposed to stay outside with us all went back to brunch, because they decided that when you don't have Donald Trump as your president, all of a sudden racism, access to healthcare, or the lack of access to healthcare, all of that all of a sudden disappeared. And I hope that the one thing that we all learn here today is that we have to be a consistent movement and continue to center our causes and the very people that are being harmed. And most of the communities that we were fighting for, or the people who joined us to fight for in Trump 1.0, are still the same communities that are being harmed today. So as we're organizing, as we're mobilizing, we have to have some new protocols in place, because this administration right now has basically been very clear that they are targeting access to free speech for some people, not everybody, but for some people, for those who are opposing the agenda of this administration. And in particular, they have started, as you all know, with folks who have vulnerable immigration statuses. Either they're undocumented, or people, for example, who may have student visas, may be here on other types of visas. And so this administration is trying to find the most legal things that they can do to try to revoke and scare us, the rest of us, into submission, or really into silence. And so as you are organizing and mobilizing, I'm going to share a few things with you. Number one, be responsible. If you are going to engage in any sorts of acts of nonviolent civil disobedience, this may not be the time to invite our undocumented friends to participate. They should make those decisions on their own, but we should not be encouraging that, because it is a very vulnerable moment for our undocumented organizers. This is the moment to say to the undocumented friends that we have in our movement, we want you in our movement. We need your voices in our movement, but we also want to protect you, and we need you to be safe. And the protocols that you do and put forth, as in making sure that if there is nonviolent civil disobedience, that these folks understand the exact situation that's about to happen so they can make the right decisions for themselves. We have to be responsible not to put anyone in harm's way, especially if we understand what the consequences of the action that we're about to take. So that's very important in this moment. Also around sharing of information, even as we protest. But before we protest, oftentimes we have to educate people about where we want them to go and for what reason. Some of the things I've been seeing on the internet right now are very alarming and very disturbing. And they're coming from people who I would consider to be wonderful people, well-intentioned people, who are putting memes on the internet saying, ICE is on the corner of Cortelliu and McDonald Avenue. Please, if you have not verified that information yourself, if you cannot verify what time and what date that information came from, if you are not connected to an immigrant serving organization in that neighborhood who can verify this information, please do not share information irresponsibly. Because what we are doing is we are actually adding to the panic and anxiety of the very people we are claiming to want to protect and defend in our communities. And so for us as organizers, as activists, as people who are protesters, being as vigilant as possible when it comes to not being part of the disinformation and misinformation machine that is out there, that also oftentimes from our side is very well intentioned, but could really be harmful for our communities. I have 2 children who are public school teachers in New York City, and families are coming to the school saying they want to withdraw their children from school. There are people who are not showing up to work because of all this information that is moving around them. You know, a lot of folks right now don't know where to start. They don't know. They're like, there's so many issues. There's so many things. Everything's wrong. Today, I heard there's an executive order where Donald Trump wants to prepare 30,000 beds in Gitmo, in Guantanamo. And we've been trying to shut Guantanamo down for the last, 20 some years. And so that every day there's something new. There's ban these people. We're going to take away visas from these protesters. We're going to stop all, withdraw from the World Health Organization. Like, there's so much information that we are being inundated with. And for me, I say to people, you can't be everything to everybody. You can't protest everything. What I suggest for folks in this moment is to find a political home. Oftentimes, protesters are people who hear about something on the internet. They're like, okay, I'm in solidarity. This is about Palestine. This is about, immigrant rights or whatever. And they show up. And that's important. Showing up is important to these mobilizations. But the question is, who are you connected to? What are you doing the day after the protest? What network are you a part of? Are you part of a mutual aid network in your community? Are you partnered up with a local immigrant rights serving organization? There's so many people in your community that need you right now. And so my suggestions to folks right now and how we're showing up in this moment is people are also looking to people like us for some confidence. We have to let people know that we're going to prevail. All of us here are connected to a community, to ancestors, trust me, who have been through much worse than Donald Trump. The world is not all doomed, my friends. This is not the end of the world. It is a hard moment for our generation, and I promise you we're going to get through it. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be people in our communities who will be sacrificed along the way, and it will be a tragedy, and it will be outrageous. But people have had to sacrifice in the past. And so our job is to the best of our ability to protect the most vulnerable amongst us, but we cannot back down from an authoritarian regime. We cannot say we're going to wait out these 4 years. What we're going to do in the next 4 years is we will still mobilize, but we will also build quietly. We will build infrastructure. We will build power over the next 4 years. We will invest in organizations. We will start being more interdependent versus dependent on philanthropy and all the organizations that always leave us hanging in the most critical and important moments. And so I'm saying to all of you, find a political home. If you are an organizer of a protest and there are people that you know that are in the protest who are undocumented, make sure there are legal folks around. Make sure that you have legal support at these rallies, folks that understand the rights of those who are migrants or immigrants. Because guess what, folks? They do have rights, and you have rights as well. And moving forward, what can you do more than just showing up to a rally or a protest? What is a skill that you have that you can offer a network? And I'll just conclude with saying this. Here at the Teach-In Network, for example, many speakers that are experts in different areas, this is a skill we have. We have something to share, something to offer. We know something. We feel like we may be confident in some sort of information. So that's what we're contributing here. Some of us train in nonviolent civil disobedience and Kingian nonviolence. You may be a graphic designer. You may be someone who knows how to do grassroots fundraising. You may be someone who's good at media, who's a content creator, who's a videographer, a documentarian. You may be an attorney or a lawyer. You guess what? We need everybody. So figure out what your skill set is and try over the course of the next 2 weeks to do some research in your local community and say to an organization, this is the skill set that I have. These are the amount of hours that I'm able to give. And this is what I want to offer to the movement. Because right now, we really are all we got. Can't trust the Republicans for sure. Democrats ain't your friends either, I'm sorry to say. Maybe a couple of nice ones. But overall, the political parties, the establishment, these are not the people who are going to protect us. Only we will protect us. And so I'm here. I'm committed. I'm fired up. I'm not afraid of this administration. I'm going to keep doing what I've always been doing, and let's keep doing it. And remember that when 2028 rolls around and Donald Trump, hopefully, God knows what they'll do, but let's just say 2028 rolls around and Donald Trump is not the president anymore. That is not an invitation for people to go back to brunch again and then come back again when you think another authoritarian was here. So let's hope that we make a commitment to one another that we're going to continue this fight till all of our marginalized people are free in this country.
Thank you, Linda. Getting us fired up. Couple quick questions for you. Let's do 2 questions. You mentioned there's just a ton of bad news. It's nonstop coming from, it's a barrage from Trump. How do we focus in a blizzard of bad news? Real quick. Yeah, how do we focus on one issue and protest something when there's a new thing every day?
I think when you find a political home, and for example, if you're someone that's like, I really care about immigrants, I really care about migrants, I still want to be part of the pro-Palestinian movement in this country. I am worried about our planet. Everything else is moot if we don't have a planet to live on. When you find a political home, Ryan, what ends up happening is that you invest a lot of time on that issue. And please feel confident that other people that are in racial justice, other people will be in access to healthcare, defending those with disabilities. So don't ever feel like if you're not everywhere, that no one is anywhere else. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times we feel like we got to be everywhere. Just find a political home, invest your time in that. And when there are times where you can show up once or twice or three times for an issue, that's fine. For example, you have a political home, you could donate at the immigrant rights or, a community, but you may be able to donate to the climate justice movement or something of that nature. So don't feel like you got to be everything to everybody. Lastly, I'll say about the inundation of information. The bottom line is half the stuff that you're listening to are not implementable. They're not enforceable. They're actually not legal. Donald Trump's whole plan here is he has to keep promises to his supporters. So he has endless pens at the White House. They got thousands of pens. He signs an executive order saying, I'm going to end birthright citizenship. Just so what? Guess what? You can't do that, my friend. It's the 14th Amendment. You got to have a constitutional amendment to do it. My point is that don't believe that everything horrible coming out of this administration is going to happen. FYI, everyone went wild around the freezing of aid, of grants to states. Guess what just happened today? OMB had to pull back their memo. This is what happens. Stay outraged. Get your universities to speak up. Get the hospital administrations outside. Get your local elected officials to start saying, we will not stand for this. And get what the administration had to back down. So again, find a political home. Understand that not everything bad that Donald Trump wants to do is actually enforceable. That kind of gives you a little bit more calm. And again, being rational in this moment is key to our survival. If we are in chaos all the time and in panic, we are going to weaken ourselves. And then the people who are supposed to follow the quote leaders are not going to follow leaders who are panicky, leaders who are all confused, leaders who are, on the internet saying, oh my God, it's the end of the world.
Right.
Take a deep breath and remember that your ancestors went through way worse than Donald Trump.
Thank you, Linda. And I just want to get this one last question is because you talked a lot about immigrants. How can we safely not cooperate with ICE?
We have rights, and even our migrant sisters and brothers, they have rights. There are so many incredible organizations like the New York Immigration Coalition. Obviously, the ACLU has stuff that is out there. The Illinois Coalition on Immigrant and Refugee Rights has the immigrant rights community is incredible. They have multilingual know your rights information. If you don't have to, if ICE doesn't have a warrant, they're not allowed to come into your facility. They're not allowed to come into your home. That is actually part of the law. You don't have to talk to ICE agents. You can say, I need a lawyer. Like this idea that our immigrant communities have no power or no rights is not true. So we just have to keep re-emphasizing that you have rights and send people the resources to not only attend Know Your Rights training, but again, there are multilingual videos. I did a series with CUNY Clear and ACLU, New York Civil Liberties Union, and the ACLU, where we did actual videos. They're like kind of animations in Arabic, in Farsi, in Urdu, in Spanish, in Cantonese, Mandarin. We translated my over voices for the Arabic because we know that our community has rights. And so that's the other thing that I want protesters and organizers and activists to do is to please, when you look at your migrant neighbors, your friends who are undocumented, who are in our movements, be like, look, you got rights. You are a valuable human being. And in this country, it doesn't matter if you're a citizen or a legal permanent resident, you have rights. So again, New York Immigration Coalition, the Illinois Coalition on Immigrant and Refugee Rights, their resources are crowdsourced. I'm sure teaching folks are going to put something together about that. And the reason, just to say, end with this, Ryan, is that I kept saying immigrants is because in this moment, we also can't do what they call oppression Olympics. There are so many communities that are under attack. I don't want anyone to think that I'm leaving anybody. We already know, I already know my people are like, it's about to go down in about 50 days. They're about to ban the Muslims again. You already know. And they're going to take visas away from a lot of these foreign exchange students or foreign students. Many of them are from countries that, I'm from or connected to. But the point I'm saying is that immigrants right now are under attack, like blatantly under attack. Like this administration has been blatantly in New York City. The Department of Homeland Security secretary literally was just in New York yesterday wearing a police ice vest, showing you that this is a spectacle. They are creating spectacles, productions, major productions to scare our community. So again, Ryan, maybe that's something we could share with folks that are on this webinar today. Maybe post this webinar some resources around know your rights, because I think that's going to be really important. The more, when they say knowledge is power, I know it sounds like a cliche, but it absolutely is not. When you have knowledge, when you understand your rights, you can assert power in ways versus you not knowing that you have your rights or have.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Linda. So great to have you. Really appreciate it. I did just post the aclu.org Know Your Rights Immigrant Rights link. So check that out. Share that with people you know. We're a couple minutes behind because I had to ask those questions. I really wanted to. Our next speaker is Jeffrey Sterling, who's going to be speaking on the legal rights of protesters. Jeffrey is a whistleblower advocate at RootsAction and a former CIA case officer who served 2.5 years in prison after being convicted of violating the Espionage Act. His memoir, Unwanted Spy, The Persecution of an American Whistleblower, was published in 2019. Jeffrey, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on.
Of course, yeah, please take it away.
All right. I'll be discussing the current landscape of repression against free speech and the legal rights of protesters to speak out and organize, particularly on campus. This will be a very broad, high-level overview. Though the focus is on universities, protests on universities, it applies outside of universities as well. I am by no means an expert, and things vary from state to state and campus to campus. So don't treat this as legal advice. I have been intimately familiar with what can happen when you choose to exercise so-called guaranteed or constitutional rights when they're inconvenient to the powers that be. You quickly learn how the guarantee is anything but. Sometimes when you're subjected to the law, you can't help but find yourself a de facto expert on the subject. So with regard to free speech and protesting, free speech and assembly, particularly on college campuses, has been a cornerstone of higher education and expression in this country. Think back to the Vietnam War protests, the teach-ins, the protests in the 80s against apartheid, the free speech movements in the 60s. The list goes on. And we have all benefited from those movements. Now, what right do we have to express ourselves with free speech? The First Amendment of the Constitution protects the right to assemble and express views through protest. Now, that right is not absolute. There are examples of what is not protected, like incitement to violence, true threats, fighting words, words that are likely to provoke immediately violence, obscenity in some contexts. It's funny, whenever I think of, and this would be a topic for a whole different discussion, whenever I think of what free speech is not protected, immediately January 6th come to mind. If you want good examples of what is not and should not be protected speech. So where do, say, universities fit within our constitutional right to free speech? Now, public universities are directly bound by the First Amendment. Private universities, not directly, but they still have to abide by state laws and their own policies that uphold free speech principles. Universities do have responsibilities to ensure safety and a non-discriminatory environment. With this responsibility, universities can regulate the time, place, and manner of protests in order to maintain order and ensure safety. Whatever the restrictions are on free speech and also the reactions to that free speech, they must be content neutral, meaning they must apply equally to all forms of expression, regardless of their message. For example, a law prohibiting loud noises in a residential area at night would be considered content neutral. But we've seen how universities have responded to free speech, particularly with regard to the pro-Palestinian protests. During the protest, they've been weaponizing campus and local law enforcement to forcibly quash free speech. There's been suspensions of students and faculty. And afterwards, some universities have revised their free speech policies, but in actuality, some of those policies are tantamount to anti-protest and anti-free speech policies. For example, many are establishing free speech zones that are far away from the traditional free speech venues. Limits on the size of gatherings, requiring pre-approval for rallies or demonstrations. Now, to me, that is absolutely counter to spontaneity, which is a hallmark of protests. So I live in the St. Louis area, and it was so wonderful, the spontaneity of the protests that happened after Michael Brown was killed. Imagine if they had to have pre-approval for any of those protests. Pre-approval for a protest is tantamount to stopping the protest before it even starts. And a lot of these policies from universities and municipalities, they're very vague and they're too open-ended, and they may lead to confusion with regard to what is permissible on both sides of the matter. Now, have the policies and reactions, particularly with regard to the pro-Palestinian movements, have they been content neutral? No, there are notable differences. I think we can examine the responses that happened during the racial justice protests in 2020 and the current pro-Palestinian protests. With the racial justice protests, there was generally more sympathetic or at least tolerant institutional and university responses with, certainly not as many arrests as we've seen recently, or police interventions. And maybe because that universities have claimed to publicly support racial justice. But on the other side of it, the pro-Palestinian protests, these protests have challenged more politically sensitive institutional positions. Therefore, the responses have been more aggressive, punitive, and outright confrontational. They're challenging the very nature of our constitutional right under the First Amendment to free speech. So, I'm not saying all of this as a way to scare anyone away from protesting. But yeah, how do you prepare, to protest in such an environment? You know, First and foremost, understand what the law is, understand what your rights are, understand what, if you're on a campus, what the policies are with regard to free speech. And also coordinate with groups like the National Lawyers Guild or local lawyers to have legal observers present if you plan to protest, and have them there at the ready in case there are arrests. Now, social media is a wonderful outlet, but please be careful and understand that, for a university student, social media is not beyond the reach of a university who may want to punish you for your views or punish you for wanting to organize a protest or anything like that. And with regard to that, also, be careful of using anything that if you're a student, your .edu email. Don't use that for anything related to any protest or movement that you would like to try to do. And we all have our cell phones. And I think we've seen in the reports, many students have had difficulties getting their cell phones back after they were confiscated, in the wake of some of the pro-Palestinian protests. Think differently about how you communicate with your cell phone. Think that you want more secure, more encrypted communications. Great avenue for that is Signal. Understand, learn about Signal, and use that as an outlet for your communications. Now, and also, I think most importantly, understand what nonviolence means. You may be confronted as you're protesting with violence, even though that is not what you are there doing, not what you were trying to incite. The Teaching Network website has excellent information and resources on nonviolence and on how to protest. And I encourage you to go to the website to take a look at those resources, educate yourself on nonviolence and how to protest. Because they're going to be throwing the law at you. They're going to weaponize the law against you. But the law is also there to help you. The law is also there on your side. If they can come at you with the law, you can defend yourself with the law. Even in the face of opposition, stay true to your purpose. It will and has sparked conversation. And that can be the very beginning, the most important beginning of change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Always appreciated to chat with you. I do have a couple questions for you.
Mhm.
You talk about the vague laws. Do you think the vague laws are on purpose?
I think so. And that's what we generally have the courts for. If they're vague, then neither side will know exactly what it is. And that makes a law unenforceable. If it's too broadly vague, then it can't be enforced. But you have to go through the process of being persecuted by that law to then get into the discussion of how to change that law.
Good. Thank you. You also talked about these laws needing to be content neutral. But if the law's written content neutral, that's one thing. Is the enforcement ever content neutral?
Well, that's what's also examined, as I said, content neutral with regard to the speech or restrictions on the speech, but also the reaction to that speech. If a university group is going to come down hard on pro-Palestinians, but maybe there's some other political group who has the same sort of protest. I mean, that reaction also has to be content neutral. If it's not, if there is a difference, then that's in abeyance of the first of the principles of free speech in the Constitution.
Well, thank you. And I guess last thing, you mentioned you were in St. Louis. I went to Ferguson at the 1 year anniversary of the Michael Brown murder. Have you noticed, have the cops relaxed? It was bad a year later when I was there. Have things improved there? Did the protests, did they work in any way?
I think the protests were very effective. I think, unfortunately, as Linda had mentioned, people afterwards and time passes, they've gone out to brunch. Things haven't changed. The police force has gone back to the way it was, complete disregard for anyone considered a threat, anyone with brown skin. But I think the foundation is there, and people did start to rise up and say no, stand up and make their voices heard. So the impact was there. We need more people at the ready, I think.
Right. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. And we will move on now. A reminder to our speakers on the panel here, you can turn your camera off when you're not speaking. That's okay. You don't have to keep it on the whole time. Um, and yeah, we're going to throw it over to Eric Ross, one of the organizers with RootsAction, who's organizing at UMass right now, for just a couple quick words, and then we'll go to Rachel Small as our next speaker. So Eric, quickly, if you want to talk to us about what you're doing.
Sure. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, everyone. Yeah, so I just want to offer, this is just my kind of personal insight, my personal description of sort of the campus climate in this current moment. At UMass, we're returning to classes tomorrow, and it'd be an understatement to say that the situation is tense, right? There's no love for the former administration, but recent weeks, there's only been a deepened climate of fear and anxiety and uncertainty, which is, of course, the intention, right? The cruelty is the point. And this is not new. And as we all know, last spring in particular made one thing clear, that our institutions do not and arguably never have existed to serve us, right? The liberal facade collapsed as university administrations nationwide deployed militarized police against their own students, right? Students who were simply raising their voices against genocide and demanding a more democratic, just, and demilitarized campus, community, country, and world. And so at UMass, we're continuing to face increased repression, capitulation, kind of a cozying up with the current administration. But despite the hypocrisy of our universities, right, and their failure to uphold their missions, we, the faculty, the students, the staff, will not be silent, right? Universities at their best are radical laboratories for democracy, spaces that should inspire us to imagine a better world and equip us with the knowledge and power to realize it. And so this is exactly why I joined in with organized with the Teaching Network, and this is where the Teaching Network comes in. Right? We need support on campus from expert educators and organizers. We need sustained political education, especially in this moment, to transform knowledge into collective power. And teach-ins have long served this purpose and will continue to serve this purpose. So until a free Palestine and a liberated world, we're going to continue this fight. We're going to continue this fight on campus and in our communities and across the country. So join us, join the Teaching Network, support the Teaching Network. Support students on campus in any capacity that you can. And yeah, support the Teach Network, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric, and I appreciate the work you've been doing with us at Teach Network. Our next speaker, Rachel Small, is going to be speaking about blockades. Rachel is the Canada organizer for World Beyond War. She has organized social and environmental justice movements for over a decade. She has a master's in environmental studies from York University and a background in art-based activism. Rachel, thanks for all you do, and please take it away.
Thanks. And thanks to all the previous speakers. This is a really interesting panel, and I'm happy to be here. So I was asked to present on a particular protest tactic and to kind of dig into like, okay, what can an action look like, and what is one way of organizing that has felt effective? So I'm going to present a little bit about direct actions and specifically blockades, in this case, blockades to stop the flow of weapons. And in this case, specifically to stop the Canada-Israel arms trade. Just one second while I chat with my coworker.
No worries at all.
My assistant has been to some blockades and has a lot to say on them, but maybe not tonight. So let me just maybe start off by being clear that I'm not counseling anyone to do anything. I'm going to be talking about things that in some cases are likely to clash with law enforcement, are likely to clash with law, and we're going to talk about things that have happened, but I'm certainly not giving anyone any advice on this webinar. So you can't really talk about a specific tactic without at least a bit of context. So maybe I'll quickly just say there have been many, many, many facets of this campaign within Canada, which of course has parallels in other countries, to stop the flow of weapons between Canada and Israel. This has been going on for many years, but of course specifically within the last 15 months. This campaign has included lawsuits, lobbying on Parliament Hill, reports, press conferences, petitions, humongous street protests, media exposés, meeting with and protests at dozens and dozens and dozens of government reps and offices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there have been many, many aspects of people mobilizing wherever they are, using the skills and the tools, and as previous panels have said, like looking at what they can bring to this struggle in this unified campaign to get Canada to impose an arms embargo. But in the context of direct action, maybe I'll first just say that direct action or civil disobedience, nonviolent direct action, like these are words that get thrown around a lot. They're used interchangeably. I'm sure we can speak to academics who have very, very strict and specific ideas about what each of these words mean. Personally, I'm not particularly fussed about us having to have these kind of unchanging definitions for how we resist, but I maybe will just say the one way of understanding and defining direct action is kind of like it sounds, right? Like you're directly acting to address the problem you're facing, which is different, for example, versus appealing to a decision maker to take action. So when people hear direct action, they often think, oh, people are getting arrested, or it's illegal, or this or that. That can be part of it, but we're talking about what are you doing, often coming together with others to directly change the situation instead of asking someone else to change it. So maybe in contrast, for example, a month ago, we did a big sneaky action where over 100 Jews and some of our dear allies took over a parliamentary building in the capital in Ottawa, in Canada, and directly interrupted the business of the federal government. The members of parliament couldn't get to their offices. We were demanding an arms embargo. It's a very bold action. It got a lot of attention. The cops dragged us out of the building. There were many arrests. It was very successful. But this is a different kind of action, right? Because that's essentially about appealing to the decision makers to stop the flow of weapons. What I want to spend the next few minutes talking about instead is where you are actually doing the thing. So in this case, where we are actually interrupting the arms trades ourselves, not interrupting the government to try to get them to take action. So there are a lot of different ways to do this. There are actions that would mobilize workers or involve workers on the inside, let's say, of a weapons factory. There are sabotage actions that are very, very secretive, where no one ever takes ownership for it, but maybe anonymously leaks some photos of damage that was done in the middle of the night by who knows who to a weapons factory. These are all types of things that have happened in, for example, just in the past year in Canada. But I'm going to present a specific direct action model of a blockade. So we've done many, many of these in Canada. I mean, for a long time, but especially in the past year. And specifically, its model of blockade, where we are mobilizing secretly en masse to then show up at a key site at the time and day that we have chosen and very publicly block operations. There are lots of different types of blockades that you can do. This is one type. You could do a blockade like this, for example, to block an ICE facility where you've chosen the day and the time where you're all going to show up and not let them in to their vehicles, which are there, this or whatever. You can also have blockades that are the opposite, that are to protect the people inside a space. You can have a spontaneous blockade where there's a phone tree and you find out, hey, they're going to raid this school. We're actually going to blockade this school so the bad guys can't get into it. So there's lots of different ways to do blockades, but sometimes it's nice to talk about something in specific. So why don't I'm going to take 2 minutes to show you a video of some really excellent media coverage that we got after one of these weapons factory blockades, because I think it shows some of the dynamics at play, and it's more interesting than just listening to me talk about it.
Here in Toronto, several people were arrested after a demonstration this morning outside a business that supplies Israel's military. Organizers say the demonstration was about the human rights of Palestinian people. They are calling on Canadian companies to stop arming the Israeli Defense Forces. Delma Nokdak has the story.
Not another nickel! Not another dime! No more arms for genocide! Dozens of people gathered outside blocking entry into the global headquarters of Incus, a Toronto-based company specializing in armored vehicles and aerospace and defense.
So we're here to sell Incus, which has bragged about supplying the most command and control units to the Israeli government than any other company. And we're here to say Canada needs to stop arming Israel. According to materials from Israel's Ministry of Defense, Incus does supply vehicles to military bases, law enforcement agencies, and government institutions, and has been in business for over 30 years. And one of the executives was on scene here today and said that the demonstration was very disruptive and harmful to his business.
We are a Jewish family. We targeted number one because of the Jews, just shows the rise of anti-Semitism in this country.
We're lovers of peace, lovers of social justice. We oppose all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism. This is about a company's complicity.
Last year, Canada exported over $21 million worth of military goods to Israel. In a statement, Incus's chairperson writes in part, being primarily a manufacturing business, every minute of production time counts. We have lost hours. Our business has been unnecessarily disrupted. Our employees no longer feel safe in the workplace.
This situation is causing our business to lose money, to lose profits. Some people are not able to work today. It's bad to see. In today's economical situation, our country has to spend resources to uphold the law.
Incus is a private business. Toronto police say demonstrators were asked to leave and that 5 people were arrested for trespassing and released with provincial offense notices. Organizers say 7 people were arrested and provided a copy of the ticket issued with a $65 fine. They also say it won't be business as usual for companies supplying Israel's military. Delma Nokdak, CBC News, Toronto.
So there were a few reasons I wanted to show that video. We have many, many, many. I mean, first of all, it was great coverage to get on Canada's national broadcaster. But specifically, it's actually very rare that you find out from the people who were your target, from the people you impacted, what the impact of your action is. Like, that almost never happens. So you can't normally expect to have the CEO of the company come on national news and say, you cost me profits. Normally they keep that to themselves. This person was not like super well trained in how to speak to media, the CEO of the company, but we were, right? And you can also see that we were ready for the attack. Oh, this is an anti-Semitic attack. And it's like, no, we're here not because you're Jewish. We're here because this is a weapons factory that is sending armored vehicles to Israel. And we were ready for that. And that came through in this video too. Another reason I like this video is because it highlights, I think the element of fear and like the risk, but also what actually happens around criminalization. And I mean, the context is different in every place. And I'm not sort of making generalizations across the board. And I've really appreciated what the other panelists have said about looking out for each other in these times. But I also know that when people we'll hear about a protest and maybe we'll only see mainstream news or only see the police tweets about it. And it says like, oh, we arrested 10 people, blah, 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 at this thing. What people think is, oh my God, serious charges. Oh my God, these people have a criminal record. This is going to ruin their life. And like some charges can be serious. Some charges can be annoying. I personally have faced criminal charges and worked through them in court. It's annoying. And for some people, obviously, who face deportation, it can be life-ruining. However, in many cases, what we're actually facing is what was amazing that actually came through in this news broadcast was a $65 trespass ticket, which they never had to pay because we contested it. So I find it, I wanted to show this because I think it highlights some of the different things that are going on. So I'll speak for just a couple more minutes, but I do want to say like World Beyond War does run like a hour-and-a-half long direct action training, which itself is a very brief training, but that can actually get into kind of how do you do this? How do you get the media coverage you want, et cetera, et cetera. I obviously cannot cover that in a couple of minutes, but I maybe will just highlight a few key aspects to think about with this type of an action. The first thing I'll maybe say is like, the action is like the middle. And just as much work happens before and a ton of follow through happens after. So there's like a lot of prep and a lot of follow through if you want to do something that is successful and impactful in this kind of a way. So ahead of time, scout. You need to scout the location. Like I cannot overestimate the importance of a scout. If you actually want to be interrupting workers coming into a factory, you have to know everything about what entrances they use, their shift times, how many workers are there, how are they showing up? Like you really have to do in-depth scouts of the facility. But even before that, you have to do research. Part of why these types of actions have been so important in Canada over the past year is that unlike the US, people didn't know that Canada was arming Israel, and the Canadian government was maintaining that Canada wasn't arming Israel, and we had to reveal that to be true. And eventually we got to a place where we did change some of the Canadian government's export policies to Israel in the past year. We did not win a full arms embargo, but we won something that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. But first, we had to be at the weapons factories showing what was happening there. That took a ton of research. And that took partnering with the types of orgs that, for example, are think tanks that are frankly never going to show up at a blockade, but are spending the hours in spreadsheets to figure out what's happening and are happy to share some of that information with the people who are going to do a different tactic. This type of a blockade relies on an element of surprise. These were not publicly announced actions. This would never have worked if the company knew we were coming. So this involves secrecy. This involves being really cautious about who you're inviting and really leaning into relationships, building trust and community organizing. We used a kind of spiderweb model of outreach, so no one had a full list of everyone who was planning on being there. I, for example, am sending it by signal via like an encrypted channel, an invitation to 10 different people, and they are meant to pass it on only to deeply trusted people. So there was a way that information could travel, but there was no one centralized list. This is really important, especially in the context of Toronto, Canada's biggest city, where the police have been intense about criminalizing people based on data found on your phone. And I mean, we like to imagine like very, very, very advanced policing techniques. In this case, we're literally just talking about they arrest people with their phone and then they use the data that's in people's texts and messages on their phone to then criminalize other people. So we didn't want anyone to have a list of everyone who would be there. That's kind of one tidbit about how these types of actions have been organized. This was not a symbolic blockade. You can do symbolic blockades, but in this case, we actually blocked all people and vehicles for a number of hours from getting into the facility. The news cameras arrived a bit later, so the footage that you saw there, like some of the people who worked there were already kind of in front of the building, but it was a hard blockade where we used our bodies, where we linked arms to physically block cars from being able to drive in and to physically block people. We've done dozens of these blockades in the past year. At some places, we've only been able to block all vehicles because these are huge complexes without fencing around them. It was not feasible for us to block people from walking into all doors. So you got to kind of make an assessment based on your realistic capacity and the location, etc. Yeah, there's a lot more that I could say. Another thing, though, is that we decided that media was a really important aspect of the success of this action, it's not always. We tend to always think like, oh man, we didn't get much media coverage. That sucked. Sometimes media is not the point. Sometimes the point is what you did on that day and the people who gained the skills that day, and et cetera, et cetera. But in this case, because we were trying to shift a national dialogue about whether Canada was arming Israel, media was the point. So we worked hard to get that and lots of other media coverage. We talked a ton in confidence with reporters in the lead up to this action. We developed fact sheets about INCUS that were all sourced so that those reporters felt confident on national news saying, hey, this is a company that's arming Israel. If we hadn't done that, if we hadn't like handed the story to them, we wouldn't have got that coverage. So just to say that sometimes you get lucky and you get great coverage, even if you didn't work hard for it. But sometimes if that's a key part of your action, you got to work really hard for that goal. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of after work. I mean, if people get arrested, then there's tons of legal support you're going to be doing. But even if not, we're building for a longer movement. It's not about the action, right? So we try to allocate sort of as much prep time before as follow-up time after to make sure that you're wrapping things up in a good way, following up on leads you got. In this case, some workers ended up sharing some stuff with us that we followed up with them on after. Yeah, I'll cut it off there because I know I'm out of time, but I think blockades are a really fun tactic, and I think that they can be applied to lots of different situations.
Rachel, thank you so much. I have so many questions, but you're right, we are over time. So if you could just be quick with your answers, because I do want to get to some of these. You got to the media right at the end, which I think was the big deal. Did that video help the cause? Like, how much did that video help you in bring attention to what you were doing?
So we got a ton of media coverage from some of the actions, some of them not. Yeah, in this case, getting a ton of media coverage for these actions was really helpful. It supported a kind of copycat effect across the country. I mean, we were in touch with activists across the country, but also people, like, you never know what people are ready to do. Like, you might think like, oh, I know this group and they're kind of cool, but there's no way they're going to do an action like that. You don't actually know. And people watching a genocide live streamed on their phones were ready to do things that I personally would never have expected. And so there were people we reached out to say, hey, can we support you in doing this kind of thing in your city? And then there were people who totally surprised us, who watched what we did on the news and said, hey, I can do that too. And then they did. So I think that there were kind of the national political impacts of the government being embarrassed and kind of caught in a lie. But then there was also people across the country being empowered to discover their local weapons factory and do something about it.
Excellent. How many people do you think are needed to do a blockade like that? Your spider web.
Yeah, it really depends on the location. You kind of can't see in that particular video, but that factory was actually pretty small. There were two kind of car entrances and one other place people could walk in. So we were actually only talking about blocking like kind of 3-4 sort of small lanes of traffic that actually doesn't take that many people if you're well organized, if the people know to link up arms. We had some pallets too, because cars, and some people holding their bikes, because people in fancy cars care more about like their car getting scratched on a pallet or a bike than they do about driving into a protester, so it can help. But you really don't need that many people if you're well organized. Other facilities that we've been at, they're like huge. It's like multiple blocks long and you're blocking many entrances, so you need more people. And there's really important roles offsite, I should say, like the lawyers, the legal support, the people taking media calls, like the people posting on socials, like those are all people on site playing really important roles, even if they're not there in person.
Right. We're going to have to move on. I have lots more questions. I'm hoping we will eventually get to a teach-in on working with the media when doing this stuff. And I'd like to hear a lot more about the fact sheets you put together, how you built the relationships with the media. I think all that stuff's so important. So thank you for all you do. Great work in Canada. We could use you down here, just so you know. We got some issues in the States here. So if you bring that energy here, we could definitely use it. We're going to move on now. RootsAction's own Richie Sergenko is going to talk briefly about his work in LA and a little bit about the Teach-In Network. And then we're going to get to our last speakers, Sean and Christine. So go ahead, Richie.
Thank you, Ryan. Yes, hi, everyone. Shout out RootsAction and the Teach-In Network for hosting this and hosting this great tool. I'm an organizer and lawyer here in Los Angeles. I've been active in the streets for at least since 2020, and was definitely mobilizing and getting out there this past spring. And as Rachel discussed, the action part is the middle, but there's also the preparation and before and after of keeping yourself safe. So you want to keep yourself safe at all times. And I saw in the chat, someone mentioned something about bringing phones to protest. That's a decision that you have to make. But I think the reason why I'm hopping in today is the toolbox on the Teaching Network will discuss safety and security concerns for activists, and make sure you know the risks and know your rights when you go to protest, and how will the state use that against you. They're always collecting data. They're looking at social media posts. They're looking at pictures, videos. They're always trying to go after protesters, and so you have to protect yourself. And so a lot of what is actually here in the toolbox is, yes, there's some stuff about how to protest, how to get out there and protest, but also there's the know your rights. And that's especially important, as Linda was discussing before, in the current moment with immigration and the kind of the panic that is being caused around it. And that goes to how we're sharing information on social media. Where is this information coming from? How do they know? Those are all important questions. And I just want to leave with this, know your rights, yes, but know the risks and know how, even taking nonviolent action, you are challenging the state. And so know how the state will come after you. And that is, a really important thing for activists and organizers and students heading out into the streets.
Thank you so much, Richie. Thank you, as always, for the great work you do in LA and for RootsAction. If you want to organize your own teach-in, we strongly encourage you to do so. teachinnetwork.org. Get on there, reach out to us, even if you're not sure how to get started. We have a lot of experts. We have a lot of people on staff who can help you. And we have just access to all these great people, including these next two speakers, Sean Malloy and Christine Hong. They're going to be speaking on organizing the UC People's Tribunal. They're both with the University of California People's Tribunal. Sean Malloy is a professor of history and critical race and ethnic studies at UC Merced, and Christine Hong is a professor of critical race and ethnic studies and literature at UC Santa Cruz. Sean and Christine, thank you for being here. Please take it away.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and begin, and then I'll pass things over to Sean. So yes, the UC People's Tribunal, it represents a UC-wide collective of people. Sean and I are just two of the people that organize in this space. And we realized last spring, both during the time when the encampments were appearing and being organized on all the campuses, and in the wake of the intense police repression and raids on these encampments, that there was this wealth of information, research, so much stuff that had come out of this UC-wide campus-based organizing. This included information about Zionist donor influence. We had many different cases of the leadership or misleadership's persecution of anyone, professors, students, etc., staff, who were criticizing Zionism or even asserting a right of Palestinians to live. There's so much information about research complicity, war industry, investments. So much was coming out, even around mechanisms of repression. And so we really wanted to ensure that we could continue the struggle, especially as encampments were being dismantled through police force. And so we saw ourselves as very much participating in a long movement tradition of these anti-colonial justice forums. And these stem in part from the 1976 Algiers Charter and the Universal Declaration of the Rights of People. And these people's tribunals have historically, and they range politically, they've been organized from below and to the left, typically as a means of critiquing these cultures of impunity that basically shield the crimes of imperialism. And so, the Algiers Charter and the Universal Declaration of the Rights of People basically states that people have the right to free themselves from foreign domination. People have the right to fight for their liberation. And they also have the right to benefit from other people's assistance in their struggle. And we also kept in mind and that there needed to be, we're organizing in the University of California, both in and outside the University of California. We're organizing in the belly of the beast. And we had to ask ourselves, like, what is the work that we have to do? And we kept in mind that there needs to be an inside-outside dimension to this. James Baldwin in the late 60s, relative to the Vietnam War era International War Crimes Tribunal, he criticized this. And he said that for any indictment of US war crimes over in Southeast Asia to have any meaning at all, that the War Crimes Tribunal needed to be held in Harlem. And what he meant was that criminality over there had to also be paired with an unrecognized US criminality domestically. And so we kept in mind this inside-outside critique of what we were doing and the inside-outside sort of dimension of any kind of anti-imperialist endeavor in the heart of empire. And so more than even just simply organize where we happen to be, which is the research university, what we understood, and this is to borrow Maya Wynn's phrase, we understood that the US Research University is a tower of ivory and steel, and it's absolutely indispensable to the military-industrial academic complex. And we also, Sean and I and others, we're from ethnic studies. And there's a long ethnic studies tradition going back to the late 60s of not just going to the university to study or to teach or what have you, but actually to train our critical sites in organizing energy on the object of the university itself and to disclose its complicity with imperialist violence around the world. And so we were honoring in this way our kind of like Third World Liberation Front strike roots. And I think that I would just say, and we're also like within the UC system, there's a trajectory of radical criminology. And radical criminology, which was shut down at UC Berkeley in the mid-70s, understood that the greatest crimes of all are the crimes of capitalism. And so I just will close with this, and I'm going to pass things over to Sean. We understood that in this time of intensified repression, that our tribunal represents a commitment to truth, where from the misleadership there have been lies, to political education where there's been manufactured bewilderment, to the establishment of a damning historical record where there has been institutional deceit and obfuscation, and to the building of international people solidarity where there has been alignment with a genocidal imperial war machine.
Thanks, Christine. And I'll maybe pick up from there and talk a little bit about kind of the specifics of what we tried to do with our tribunal, because as Christine mentioned, tribunals can take a variety of forms and have a variety of goals. And I want to highlight two things that we tried to do with our tribunal. And first, Christina's already talked about, and that is a form of documentation. And we had the realization, particularly after a brutal spring and summer, that we frankly just do not have the power right now to enact the kind of justice that we want to see. What we do have the ability to do is to document the complicity of our institutions in genocide and ongoing Nakba in Palestine, so that when the time comes when we do have that power, or the generation that precedes us has that power, that those who are complicit can be held to account. So we've already held one session. We held a session in Northern California in November of 2024 that focused specifically on the University of California, San Francisco, which is the only campus in the UC system devoted entirely to healthcare and health sciences. We charged the leadership of UCSF with violation of the sacred healthcare oath to do no harm. We charged them with persecution and repression of students, faculty, and staff who protested against genocide and ongoing Nakba. We protested against institutionalized Zionism and anti-Palestinian racism. We have a second session in the works for Southern California in May that's going to focus specifically on the complicity of the University of California with its investments in both Israel and the military-industrial complex, as well as on the police repression of student encampments. And while a lot of our kind of day-to-day labor goes into putting together these in-person sessions, our goals are not confined to just putting on a series of one-day events, right? If you want, our first session was on YouTube, right? You can watch all 8 hours of the testimony and charges. But in the process of putting these together, we are gathering and indexing evidence related to both individual and institutional complicity in genocide that we plan to maintain as a kind of living archive that will continue long after we've done our in-person sessions. There's a second goal there, and I think it's maybe more relevant to the subject of today, although perhaps in a kind of dialectical way. And that is building collective power and creating alternative institutions. And I think, maybe kind of a little bit ironically, given the theme of today's session, the tribunal was born in part out of our fatigue with traditional forms of protest. Many of us involved in organizing the tribunal, and as Christine notes, there are a lot of us. We are two representatives of a collective of many. Many of us have been protesting our campus administrations and the UC regents for years, if not decades. And we have grown weary of constantly butting heads with institutions that have proven time and again that they are constitutionally incapable of operating in ways that are consistent with justice. I really resonated when Rachel said that she was tired of asking people to change things, and this was particularly clear to us in the response of the UC administration to the encampments last spring. You sometimes hear people complain with respect to the protest over Palestine that the leadership of the university isn't listening to us or isn't hearing our demands. But in the case of the University of California, I think that framing is just wrong. The university heard us loud and clear. And after listening to us, they chose to respond not with divestment, not with a call for a ceasefire or an end to the genocide. They responded with suspensions, expulsions, and arrests, supported by both police violence and a whole suite of new policies designed to contain protest. Our current institutions on campus and elsewhere, sadly, I don't think they're going to save us. And if we want justice, we are going to have to strengthen or create our own institutions and organizations that reflect the values we actually want to see at our university and our society. And so while the ostensible organizing goal of the tribunal is to put on these sessions, holding the UC accountable, I think for a number of us, an important motive is to model ways that we can organize across various lines, students, faculty, staff, different positionalities, to build collective power for justice and to build for a longer movement, as Rachel said, right? And also, again, I very much resonate with Rachel's point about developing skills and the confidence to use them, right? That is incredibly important for a long movement. I think the last thing I'll say is this, that, in our efforts, we are guided by an uncompromising commitment to our principles. We are committed to the confidence that Linda Sarsour mentioned that we will prevail. But I think they're also guided by a sense of humility. These are difficult and trying times for anybody who wants to organize for justice. They were difficult under the previous administration, and they are likely to be even more difficult under this new administration. And I think if we're being honest with each other, we need to admit that we don't necessarily have an answer right now to how to best proceed in the current environment. And even if we did have an answer, that environment is changing rapidly. And none of that means that we're going to give up or surrender. But I think it means we need to have honest and searching conversations among each other, among those we trust, among our comrades, about what's working, what's not working, and be ready to shift our efforts when what we're doing no longer matches the material circumstances we find ourselves in. And I think gatherings like this one, and I want to say thanks to RootsAction and the Teaching Network for bringing together all these really inspiring people who I am humbled to be with. Gatherings like this, I think, are really, really important. Both because it's good to take sustenance in each other, and it's also good to at this current moment, check in with each other. What's working? What's not working? And I think conversations like this are going to be crucial because while our commitments may be firm, we need to be flexible in our tactics. And we need to recognize that something that worked in 1968 may or may not work in 2025. And having those conversations, I think, is really critical, and particularly as part of building institutions that embody the kind of values we want to see in the world. So thank you again to both to the folks putting this on and to all the panelists. It was fantastic listening to everybody.
Thank you so much, Sean and Christine. Much appreciated. I do have several questions for you real quick, and then if we have time, I might do some Q&A with the whole group. I guess to start, what do you expect to get worse for campus organizing under this administration? Obviously, we know about just today announcing the visa purge for pro-Palestinian foreign students. So what else? What are the expectations?
I mean, the problem is the template's already been set, right? The template was set under the previous administration. I mean, we work for the University of California in, deep blue, very liberal California. And the template for repression was rolled out by a Democratic governor in a Democratic state. I think absolutely it will get worse in terms of some of the legal tools applied against protesters, but our own universities, for example, our several UC campuses were investigated under Title VI for claims of anti-Semitism. And those claims were settled because the UC said, oh, don't worry, we'll take care of this. We'll sort this out. That the university essentially agreed to be the cops. And so I think in many ways, while, yeah, absolutely it's going to get worse, the template has already been set for us. And I don't want to say it is going to be identical. I do think there will be more repression. And particularly, I think the biggest problem will be the repression against Palestinian protests will be paired with these other multitude of violent actions taken against immigrants, right? That everybody is going to be under attack, and that makes it hard to support each other, but also super critical that we maintain that solidarity.
Right. Yeah, you say the template has been set. We say, a similar thing we were saying during the last administration about Cop City in Georgia. This is happening under a Democratic president with 2 Democratic senators from Georgia. Yeah, what's going to happen under Republicans? So yeah, it's the same thing. We see this pattern everywhere. Okay, one more question, because Christine mentioned capitalism. We got to get to it. What are the big capitalist interests opposing campus organizing now, or more generally historically? It's always been pressure against any kind of campus organizing, community organizing. We're the bad guys, even though we are the good guys. So what's going on there? What is that dynamic? Is it about political power, fundraising, media? What's going on there?
I mean,
Christine,
we have a research university structure that took a different form during the Cold War period. And the entrenchment of university research with the military industrial academic complex was effectively achieved in that moment. You can backdate it somewhat, but it is, those are sort of not, you can't unlink those from each other. I'm reminded of something that Rachel was saying about disrupting at these, weapons manufacturers and sort of disrupting the ability of these places to go on in terms of business as usual. And in terms of business as usual, the university has a host of sanctions, and Sean was mentioning some of them about what happens if you disrupt the university's business. And the university's business, you can see that even demonstration operations teams, AKA DOT, okay, like these dots, they have as part of their, their sort of team structure, donor units, like units that are that have to do with cultivating like outside donors, and they get to weigh in. And so I think that one thing that our People's Tribunal has started to expose in select cases, there are many instances, are what is the impact also of donor influence on a neoliberal institution that is only nominally public and that relies upon private cash flow. And here we looked at the Helen Diller Foundation. And the Helen Diller Foundation gives to the UC that it gave $1.5 billion. There is an entire cancer hospital at UCSF that is called the Helen Diller Hospital. Yet what else? Where did this money come from? This is money that came from a Zionist family that funds all manner of, it funds Canary Mission, it funds JINSA, funding cross-training between Israeli and US police forces, training them to view local populations as terrorists. It does all manner of stuff like this. And it also, oh, sorry, I'm having my own moment. Okay. My
So many assistants today.
My assistant is coming. Hunter, no. I was going to say that with regard to what was I going to say? It was but the Helen Diller family also, where did its money come from? It came from corporate real estate. And so, like corporate real estate and a blocking of, rent control measures and other sort of, when we start to look at Zionist donor influence, it was also a portrait of all manner of ills that impact. Another big family is the Resnick family. The Resnicks are the pistachio farmers, that you've probably heard about. So like this is another huge donor to the UC. And so part of our research has been really looking into how what actually contributes to repression of the UC is actually kind of bad for the majority of the people. Sean, do you want to add anything?
I mean, I think that's a great summary. I would just add that capitalism is ultimately antithetical to any kind of true democracy, whether it's in the university or elsewhere. That's it. That's simple as.
Right. Well, yeah, it sounds like whether it's military industrial complex money or corporate money from just wealthy families supplies money to the schools, and the schools respond by giving them the research they need, like into weapons and a steady supply of students to go intern and work for them, and then ultimately the policy support by cracking down on protesters. Yeah, we got a lot of work cut out for us, and Christine, I think that's the third assistant we've had today. My son was on briefly before the call started, knocking on my door. So we've had several assistants today. It's all good. Progressives and the left make excellent parents. So with that, we are at our limit. I wish we had some more time for Q&A, but we are at our limit right now. Thank you, everyone who joined us. Sean, Christine, Jeffrey, Richie, Rachel, Eric, Linda. Thank you all so much for joining us. teachinnetwork.org. Please head over there, check it out, get involved. If you're not sure what to do, that's okay. Just reach out and we will get you started organizing your own teach-in. We have several more on the docket for the next couple months, and you will be hearing from us about those. And that's it. Everybody have a wonderful evening, and thank you.